A shepherd boy, ignored by his own father, overlooked by a prophet, yet chosen by the Creator. Before he threw the stone that changed history, his voice echoed across the valley.
Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?
But what people don't realize is that the giant was only the beginning. You would think saving a nation earns you a crown. Instead, it earned him a death sentence. You are about to witness secret escapes in the dark, dodging heavy iron spears, and a prince who willingly traded his own throne for true friendship. Stay with us till the end to see the breathtaking moment David holds the life of the madman hunting him in his bare hands, and how he rises from the ashes of a completely burned city to become the greatest king in biblical history. If these stories connect with you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us bring more of these biblical epics to life. Now, let's begin. Imagine the quiet, rugged hills of Bethlehem, far away from the heavy march of armies. Israel already had a king named Saul, towering head and shoulders above his peers. He possessed the intimidating presence of a seasoned warlord. But Saul's heart had grown completely deaf to the voice of God. He forged his own arrogant path, letting paranoia harden his spirit into stone. Because of this, the Lord Almighty declared it was time for a new king. The Lord told the revered prophet Samuel to fill a hollowed animal horn with sacred oil and go to the town of Bethlehem to anoint this new ruler. But Samuel was terrified.
Lord, how can I go? If King Saul hears about this, he will have me killed.
So God gave him a safe cover story. He told Samuel to go to Bethlehem to offer a peaceful sacrifice and to invite a man named Jesse and his sons to join him. Under this cloak of secrecy, King Saul's spies would not suspect a rebellion. Samuel arrived safely in the small sun-baked courtyard and invited Jesse's family to the feast. Jesse proudly brought out his firstborn. His name was Eliab. He had the broad, muscular shoulders of a frontline soldier. If you were casting a superhero movie, Eliab was exactly the kind of guy you would put in the lead role. Samuel smiled, completely certain this massive warrior was the chosen one. But the Lord spoke to the prophet's spirit, correcting his vision.
Do not judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart.
Samuel stepped back. Confused Jesse quickly paraded his next sons forward, Abinadab, then Shammah. But Samuel shook his head. One by one, 7 tall, battle-ready brothers stood before the prophet in the courtyard, and every single time, God said no. Samuel looked at Jesse.
The Lord has not chosen any of these. Are these all the sons you have?
Well, there is still the youngest, but he's out in the fields, watching the sheep and goats.
Send for him at once. We will not sit down to eat until he arrives.
They waited in the hot sun. Finally, a teenage boy came jogging up the rocky path. His rough linen tunic carried the heavy scent of wild pastures. His skin was bronzed, his eyes sharp. His name was David. Jesse hadn't even invited his youngest boy to the feast. Compared to his massive, soldier-like older brothers, David didn't look like king material at all. He was just a simple, dusty shepherd kid. But the exact moment the boy stepped into the courtyard, the Lord spoke to Samuel.
This is the one.
Samuel uncorked the heavy horn and poured the fragrant golden oil directly over David's head. In that exact moment, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David. There were no trumpets, no gold crowns. David simply wiped his face and went right back to his sheep, carrying a world-changing secret. If you believe God is preparing you for something great, comment "I believe" right now. Years passed. The quiet peace of Israel was suddenly and violently broken. A ruthless, heavily armored empire called the Philistines marched into the land. King Saul scrambled to gather the terrified soldiers of Israel, pitching their tents on a rocky mountain ridge. Between the two glaring armies lay a deep, wide space, the valley of Elah. For 40 days, the armies just stared at each other. The tension was thicker than heavy black smoke. Nobody moved, nobody attacked. Then the Philistines unleashed their ultimate weapon of terror. The valley was dead silent. The ground began to tremble. A low, rhythmic booming echoed off the canyon walls. From the thick, swirling dust of the Philistine line, a massive, heavily armored warrior marched out into the empty dirt. He carried a bronze shield the size of a heavy wooden door.
Look at the size of him! He's a monster!
The massive warrior stopped in the center of the valley. Beside him, a Philistine announcer puffed out his chest.
Tremble, men of Israel! Make way for the undefeated champion of Gath!
The giant with the shield suddenly knelt, dropping the massive bronze shield into the dirt with a heavy thud. A colossal, terrifying shadow stretched out across the dusty valley floor, completely swallowing the massive announcer. The announcer stopped mid-breath. He looked nervously over his shoulder, bowed his head respectfully, and literally jogged out of the way. From the shadows behind him stepped Goliath. He was impossibly huge, standing over 9 feet tall and casting a suffocating shadow over the valley. In one hand, resting effortlessly on his shoulder, he carried a spear with a shaft as thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with 15 pounds of lethal cold iron.
That first one. He wasn't the champion. He's just the shield bearer. Elohim, help us!
He made the giant shield bearer look like a child. Without breaking his stare, Goliath reached down with his free hand, effortlessly ripped the massive bronze door shield out of the dirt and hoisted it onto his arm. He was a walking, breathing dreadnought. He took a deep breath, and his voice hit the Israelite camp like a physical shockwave.
Why are you all coming out to fight? I am the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me!
The words hit the camp like physical blows. King Saul, the tallest man in Israel, sat in his royal tent, shaking in absolute terror. For 40 days, morning and evening, the giant roared his challenge, and twice a day the army of God backed away in complete paralysis. Meanwhile, miles away from the terrifying front lines, David was quietly guarding his father's flock. Suddenly, the peaceful hills were shattered as a hungry, wild lion lunged violently toward a defenseless lamb. David did not freeze, he did not hide. He placed a smooth riverstone in his simple woven leather sling. He spun it blindingly fast and fired with kinetic perfection. The heavy stone struck the lion, and David rescued the lamb right out of its mouth. He never missed. The next morning, Jesse called David down from the peaceful hills. The ticking clock of the nation's survival was about to violently collide with David's destiny.
Take this roasted grain and bread to your brothers. See how they are getting along, and bring back a report.
David ran for half a day to the military camp. He arrived just as the ground began to shake. Goliath stepped out and shouted his daily curse. David watched in shock as heavily armored men scrambled backward in sheer panic. David's heart burned.
What will a man get for killing this Philistine? Who is this pagan anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God?
His oldest brother, Eliab, overheard him. Hearing his teenage little brother ask fearless questions humiliated him, turning instantly into condescending anger.
Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is, and you came down only to watch the battle. What have I done now? Can't I even speak?
David ignored his brother's insult. He turned his back, faced the terrified soldiers, and loudly repeated his claim.
Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?
The rumors of a fearless teenager swept through the ranks. King Saul summoned him immediately. When David walked into the royal tent, the king could hardly believe his eyes.
Don't be ridiculous. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth.
When a lion or a bear steals a lamb, I do not hide. I strike it and rescue the lamb. I will do the exact same thing to this Philistine. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine.
Saul stared at the blazing certainty in the boy's eyes. But Saul still thought like a frightened human. He ordered his servants to strap his own massive royal bronze armor onto the teenager. They dropped a heavy bronze helmet over David's curls and handed him an oversized iron sword. David stumbled awkwardly. He looked ridiculous.
I can't go in these. I'm not used to them.
David stripped off the heavy metal. Instead, he picked up his wooden staff and walked straight down the rocky hill to the fast-moving brook in the valley. He knelt by the water and carefully selected 5 perfectly smooth river stones. He dropped them into his bag and stood back up. The valley floor was dead silent. Goliath squinted through the blinding sunlight. He expected a massive warrior with a heavy shield. Instead, he saw a kid holding a wooden walking stick. The giant felt deeply insulted.
Am I a dog that you come at me with a stick? Come over here, and I will feed your flesh to the birds and wild animals.
Goliath fully expected the boy to run in panic, but David did not step backward. His voice rang out with pure, unbreakable confidence.
You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of Heaven's armies. Today the Lord will conquer you, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel.
Goliath was furious. He lowered his massive spear and began to stomp forward. The ground literally trembled. David sprinted directly toward the giant. He reached into his bag, loaded a smooth stone into his leather sling, spun it rapidly above his head, and released. The stone launched across the vast distance in a fraction of a second. It struck Goliath exactly in the center of his forehead. The heavy river stone sank deep into the bone. The giant froze. His eyes rolled up. For a single second, the entire valley held its breath. Then the mountain of a man crashed face first into the dusty dirt. Complete shock swept over the valley. David sprinted to the fallen giant, grabbed Goliath's own massive sword, and finished the job. Pure panic set in. The invincible Philistine army turned and ran. The men of Israel let out a deafening shout, poured over their wooden barricades, and chased the terrified Philistines completely out of their land. The impossible victory was won. The unknown shepherd boy became a national hero overnight. David was brought to the royal tent, still awkwardly dragging the incredibly heavy sword of the giant. King Saul's trusted commander led David right up to the king. Also standing in the tent was King Saul's oldest son, Prince Jonathan. He was a highly respected, brave warrior and the undisputed heir to the throne. But when Jonathan watched David, he saw the undeniable power of the Lord. He did not see David as a rival for the crown. He saw a loyal brother in arms. Jonathan stepped forward. He took off his expensive royal robe and placed it directly onto David's shoulders. Then the prince unbuckled his own sword, his bow, and his royal belt, handing them all to the shepherd boy.
The crown does not belong to me. The Lord has chosen you, David. I would rather serve at your right hand than fight against the Creator. May the Lord be with you, as he used to be with my father. And may you treat me with the faithful love of the Lord, as long as I live.
But King Saul did not share his son's joyful heart. As the victorious army marched back into the cities, women danced with bright tambourines and sang rhythmic songs of victory.
Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s.
They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Next, they will be making him their king.
From that day forward, King Saul viewed the shepherd boy as his ultimate threat. For the next few months, Saul made David a frontline military commander, secretly hoping he would be killed in battle. But David succeeded in every single mission, and the people loved him even more. Seeing this, Saul offered his younger daughter, Princess Michal, to David in marriage, but it was a deadly trap. He ordered David to lead a suicide mission against 100 fierce Philistine warriors. Saul was absolutely certain David would be killed in battle. But the king's wicked plan completely backfired. David didn't just survive, his men doubled the requirement and defeated 200. David safely returned and married Princess Michal, who truly loved him. Seeing God's undeniable, miraculous favor on the young man, Saul's paranoia grew even darker. One quiet evening, David was sitting in the dimly lit royal chamber, gently playing his wooden harp. The music was meant to soothe the tormented king, but the heavy silence felt dangerous. Across the room, King Saul sat heavily on his throne, tightly gripping a heavy iron spear. David closed his eyes and began to sing softly into the shadows. But the peaceful melody only fed the dark, tormented spirit inside the king. Saul's bloodshot eyes twitched in the dim torchlight. His white-knuckled grip violently tightened around the thick wooden shaft of his iron spear. Without a single word of warning, Saul lunged off his throne. David saw the sudden flash of metal and dodged just in time. David fled back to his own house, but Saul immediately sent armed assassins to surround it in the dark. His wife, Michal, knew her father's deadly plan.
If you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you'll be killed!
She quickly grabbed a heavy rope and lowered David safely down through a back window into the shadows. He slipped into the night and secretly found Prince Jonathan.
What have I done? Why is your father trying to kill me?
Jonathan couldn't believe his father would go that far. The two friends in arms hatched a dangerous plan. David would hide in a field during the grand royal feast. If King Saul was peaceful about David's absence, it was safe. But if the king exploded in anger, David had to run. At the feast, King Saul noticed David's empty chair. When Jonathan tried to defend his best friend, the king's paranoia turned into total blind rage.
You fool! Don't I know you have sided with the son of Jesse? As long as he lives, you will never be king. Bring him to me, for he must die.
Saul grabbed a heavy iron spear and violently hurled it directly at his own son. Jonathan dodged the metal just in time. His heart was completely broken. He knew the terrifying truth. His father was truly gone. The next morning, Jonathan went out to the quiet field and shot 3 arrows as their secret signal. David emerged from his hiding place and fell to the ground. The 2 brothers in arms wept bitterly and embraced in the tall grass.
Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other. In the name of the Lord.
Jonathan watched as his best friend walked away into the harsh wilderness. The young hero, who had bravely saved the nation, was now a hunted fugitive. For years, David lived on the run. He hid in dark caves, deep forests, and harsh, unforgiving deserts. He gathered a group of loyal, tough men who followed him into exile. But they were always moving, always looking over their shoulders. King Saul was absolutely obsessed with hunting him down. The king took 3,000 of his absolute best elite soldiers and hunted David like a wild animal across the rocky hills. One hot afternoon, Saul's army was marching near a desolate place called En-Gedi. The king needed to rest. He saw a large dark cave near the road. He went inside completely by himself, leaving his heavily armed guards outside. Saul had absolutely no idea the deep and the total darkness at the very back of that exact cave, David and his men were hiding. David's men peered through the thick shadows, completely frozen in shock as the massive king walked in. The ultimate stealth opportunity had just walked right into their trap. They whispered urgently to David, their voices thick with desperation.
This is the day the Lord spoke of. He has delivered your enemy right into your hands. Deal with him however you wish. Strike him now and let us go home.
It looked like the perfect, flawless solution. Saul had tried to end David's life many times. Now David had the absolute power to end the chase forever. David quietly drew his sharp iron knife. Slipping silently through the deep shadows, he closed the distance to the front of the cave. Instead of hurting the king, David carefully reached down and sliced off a small corner of Saul's royal robe. He put his knife away and snuck quickly back into the shadows. Even cutting the fabric made David's conscience bother him.
The Lord forbid that I should do this to my lord the king.
I will not attack the Lord's anointed one, for the Lord himself has chosen him.
David completely refused to take the crown by his own power. He ordered his men to stand down. They watched in absolute silence as Saul walked completely out of the cave, totally unharmed. Once Saul was a safe distance away, David stepped out of the cave into the bright sunlight. He called out across the rocky valley.
My lord the king, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut it off, but I did not kill you.
This proves that I am not trying to harm you, and that I have not sinned against you, even though you have been hunting for my life. Let the Lord judge between us.
King Saul stared at the torn cloth. He realized exactly how close he had come to the end. Saul dropped to his knees and began to weep loudly right there in the canyon.
You are a better man than I am. You have repaid me good for evil. May the Lord reward you well for the kindness you have shown me today.
And now I realize that you are surely going to be king. Move! Retreat!
True to his word, King Saul called off the hunt and marched his 3,000 men back home. David proved that true strength isn't just fighting giants, it's knowing when to show mercy. He had spared his greatest enemy. Even after the merciful encounter at the cave, David knew King Saul's mind was broken. The peace would not last. To protect his loyal men and their growing families, David led them deep into the remote southern desert to a quiet border town called Ziklag. For the first time in years, they had actual homes. They had a safe haven. But one hot afternoon, as David and his army marched back from a long 3-day patrol, they looked down into the valley, expecting to see their peaceful city. Instead, they saw massive pillars of thick black smoke. David sprinted down the hill. The gates were smashed. The houses were reduced to smoldering, burning ash. A brutal Amalekite raiding party had attacked while the men were gone. They had burned the entire city to the ground and kidnapped every single woman and child, including David's own family. The tough, battle-hardened soldiers fell to their knees in the ashes.
This is his fault! He left the city unprotected! Stone him!
The very men who had followed David into exile were now picking up heavy rocks to crush his skull. In the absolute darkest moment of his life, David dropped to his knees in the ashes and prayed.
Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?
The answer from the Lord was immediate and completely clear.
Pursue them. You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue.
David stood up from the ashes. His despair was completely gone.
Drop the stones! The Lord has spoken! We will not die in these ashes!
We are going to pursue them, we will overtake them, and we will rescue our families.
The men stared at David. They saw the blazing certainty in his eyes. They picked up their swords and fell into line behind their leader. David tracked the Amalekite raiding party deep into the desert. He found them scattered across the landscape, eating, drinking, and celebrating their massive pile of stolen loot. He launched a massive coordinated surprise attack at twilight. David and his men fought continuously for 24 straight hours. They completely crushed the Amalekite forces. When the dust finally settled, the miracle was fully realized. David walked through the enemy camp and found his family. Every single wife, every single child, every single piece of stolen property. Not a single person was missing. David recovered absolutely everything. It was the ultimate proof of his leadership. He hadn't just saved his own family. He had fought to save his people. While David was rescuing his family in the south, a massive Philistine army launched a devastating invasion in the north. King Saul led his troops to defend the nation on the steep, rocky slopes of Mount Gilboa, but the Israelites were completely overrun. The fierce combat claimed the lives of Saul's sons, including the brave Prince Jonathan. As the army retreated, King Saul himself was critically wounded by enemy archers.
They are here! Don't let them take me!
Terrified of being captured by the Philistines, Saul begged his armor-bearer to end his life.
No! I can't! Please don't make me!
When the terrified servant refused, the fallen king fell upon his own sword. Israel's first king met a tragic, dark end. A few days later, while David and his men were rebuilding Ziklag, a battered messenger arrived in David's camp and fell to the ground.
The people have fled from the battle, and many of the men have fallen!
King Saul and his son Jonathan are also dead.
David did not celebrate the death of his enemy. Instead, he wept bitterly for his best friend, Jonathan. He mourned the tragic fall of Israel's first king. He picked up his wooden harp, its strings heavy with sorrow, and sang a heartbreaking lament that would be remembered for generations. When the mourning was over, God told him to go to the ancient city of Hebron. There, the tribe of Judah officially anointed David as their king. But the rest of the nation was in chaos. Saul's surviving military commander took Saul's son Ishbosheth and crowned him king over the northern tribes. For 7 long years, a bitter civil war tore the divided nation apart. But slowly, the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker, while the house of David grew stronger and stronger. Finally, the northern resistance collapsed. The leaders of all the tribes of Israel traveled south to Hebron to gather around the shepherd king.
We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us,
You were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns.
and the Lord said to you, "You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler."
They brought out a horn of holy oil. They poured it over David's head, officially anointing him as the king over all of Israel. The long, agonizing wait was finally over. David would go on to rule the nation for 40 years. He captured the impregnable fortress of Jerusalem, making it his capital. He pushed back the enemies of Israel on every side, securing a golden age of peace and prosperity. The boy who was ignored by his father, mocked by his brothers, and hunted by his king had become the greatest ruler in biblical history. He was a warrior, a poet, a sinner, and a savior. But most importantly, he was a man after God's own heart.
Hi guys, these videos takes many hours of hard work. If you could, please like the video and subscribe.
Also, we want to see which countries our videos reach.
If you could, please comment which country you're watching from. It'll truly help us. And as promised, here are the songs from the movie. Enjoy.
The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked advance against me to devour my flesh, when my enemies and my foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. Hear my voice when I call. Oh Lord, be merciful to me and answer me. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my helper. Do not reject me or forsake me, O God, my Savior. gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in the streets of our enemies, lest they rejoice over our sorrow. How the mighty have fallen in battle, the weapons of war have perished in the dust. Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved, in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions, of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and gold. My heart breaks on the mountains of Gilboa, where the shield of the mighty was struck down. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful. How the mighty have fallen.